coming up sounds really interesting. Oh, good. You remember to record.
Yes, you
Remembered.
did. Good girl.
I've done television interviews with reporters, and there have been a few times where they forgot to record the interview, and they say, "Oh no, can we do it over again?" So it happens to the
I
best
never
of
have the
us.
nerve to ask, so I just do without if I forget it.
Yeah. So thanks for the warm introduction. I'll dive right in. So the program tonight, and thanks for joining me, is how to go in ice and snow. It's that time of year. It's November. Thanksgiving's over, and we're looking toward the holidays and our first big snowfall of the year, which we have not seen yet in Massachusetts. Some of our friends in upstate New York have gotten some snow already. But now's a great time to kind of brush up on our winter driving techniques and how to maintain our cars, and the things that you don't want to remember when you're actually on the road when the flakes are falling. So here in New England, if I do this presentation in person, sometimes I ask a random person, what's the scariest winter driving experience you've had? If somebody here wants to share one, they're more than welcome to. Or I'll try to spark a conversation about, are you nervous when you're driving in the winter, or do you dread driving in the winter? Is this something you have to confront? Because as New Englanders, it's something we kind of deal with on an annual basis. We trade stories. We've all had close calls. We wake up in the morning after that first snowfall and put on the news, and we see all the spin outs and slide outs and people who crash. It's like sometimes people seem to have forgotten how to drive in the snow. But by the end of the winter and in the late February, March, next thing you know, we are all pros and experienced in the snow, and we've been shoveling all winter. If we get a lot of snow. And the Farmer's Almanac this year says we may be getting a lot of snow. So if that's the case, hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll be rip roaring ready to go. But I will say the first tip I'm going to give you is, if you don't have to drive in the snow, don't, right? So we give a lot of advice on what to do in the snow, and we're going to talk about all the different topics, but really the long and short of it is, if you can avoid it entirely, that's the best thing to do. So if you have the luxury of canceling an appointment, rescheduling, avoid it altogether, because frankly, it's just much more dangerous to drive in the snow than on a clear road. And in most cases, depending on the storm, usually within a day or two of a major snowfall, the roads are generally plowed by then. There's blacktop, and our primary concerns about traction and sliding around in actual snow have been mostly addressed. So that said, even after the snowfall, though, we have things that we need to think about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is preparing your vehicle. Tires are the biggest thing to really focus on as far as staying safe, especially in the winter. So there's a lot of debate in New England, depending on where you live, whether or not you should be switching to snow tires, or whether a good pair of all-season tires is enough for the entire winter. So it's kind of a tough situation. Some people swear by snow tires. Snow tires are winter tires. Winter tires and snow tires are the same thing. Many folks, they've got two sets of tires. They have their all seasons or their summer tires, and then around by now, they will have switched over to their set of snow tires. You don't have to invest in a set of snow tires if you don't necessarily want to, if you're not driving a lot, if you just, have a good pair of all-season tires that are in good condition. And we'll get in, I have a couple interesting graphs to look at in a couple of slides that show actual stopping distances and how much more distance it takes to stop a car with worn out tires, or what it looks like in snow as opposed to dry pavement. So that'll be pretty illuminating. But a good set of all-season tires that has good tread are pretty acceptable in the winter here in New England. You can get by just fine with those tires if they have good tread. Snow tires are definitely going to outperform any set of all-season tires. However, a good set of snow tires will it's like night and day when you're driving in the snowy conditions. And another thing about snow or winter tires that people don't often think about is the fact that it's not just traction in actual snow, but the compound that the tire's made of, the rubber, is a lot softer. So in those really cold conditions, when it's below 30 degrees, the pavement's really cold, the snow tire is just going to give you that much more grip. The winter tire is going to give you much more grip because the compound is much softer. All season tires get hard. They harden up a bit more. So you lose a lot of traction from that hardness in those really cold conditions. If you have summer tires on your car in very cold conditions, it's like driving on rocks. I mean, they really are not designed for the winter. So they're extremely dangerous really to drive in summer tires. So if you have summer tires on your car, you need to switch to snow tires in the winter. No arguments there. And then the other thing, tires is battery. So the battery, this is the time of year where people call AAA in the morning because the car won't start. 5 years is about the average lifespan of a battery here in New England. Batteries wear out pretty quickly here in New England, a lot of times because, batteries in our part of the world go through a lot of abuse, especially in the summer. It's actually the summer that's really killing our batteries. It's the heat that wears out a battery's capacity and lifespan much more than cold, actually. So what ends up happening is all summer long, we're driving, we're wearing out our batteries. And after a few years, this summer might be the summer where your battery finally wears out fully and you need to replace it, but you don't realize that until we get that first cold snap. So what happens is your battery's ability to generate that initial surge of power to turn over the engine and crank the engine and get the car started. In the summer, you don't necessarily need as much strength from the battery to get that surge of power because, the electrons are flowing pretty good in the summer. So a weak battery, you can kind of get by in the warm weather, but when it's cold, the electrons in that battery like really slow down. And so you need a stronger, healthier battery to kind of get going. So that's why all those weakened batteries really just kind of up and die after that first cold snap. So if your battery is more than 5 years old, it's time to get it checked and maybe replaced. If you're a AAA member, we have a battery service where, you schedule an appointment at your convenience using our app, or you call. The battery truck comes to your house. We have folks come, they pop the hood, they'll check the battery. We hook it up to some special equipment and it tells you the strength of the battery, the age of the battery, whether or not it should be replaced or not. We won't sell you a battery if you don't need one. But if you do it, you can buy it there, or at least you can get the information to go buy the battery yourself somewhere else if you don't want to go through us. But you should probably go through us because we sell good batteries, interstate batteries, and they are they're solid batteries. And we charge basically what you'd pay if you go buy it somewhere like AutoZone. But needless to say, one of the nice things about having the battery service is we clean your terminals too. We clean the corrosion off there and make it nice and clean and tidy, and then you're good to go. So the battery is the other thing to think about other than tires. And then your lights, if you drive a newer car, you probably don't have to worry about it, but it's always good to just make sure all your lights are in proper working order. If your car is a little bit older, the lens in front of the headlight often will have started to yellow, and there may be some pock marks, wear and tear from all the dirt and sand and rocks that bounce against looks like someone's trying to join. So eventually the lens can break down to the point where your visibility is affected. So there are kits that you can buy online, or you can buy at auto parts store that will restore the lens to your headlights. It's usually a multi-stage process where you kind of smooth out the surface with a polishing compound, and then you kind of buff it, and you can get it almost factory new looking. The difference is pretty tremendous, especially if your lights are really yellowed and aged. The important thing to remember is that when you get one of these kits, make sure the final step in a good kit to do this includes a sealant, which will prevent it from just re-yellowing back up. When you remove that layer with a polishing compound in the first stage of the polishing and refurbishment process, you're kind of removing that factory protective layer. So you need to reapply the sealant to prevent it from just kind of degrading rapidly after that. So that's important to look at. Brakes, if you haven't had your brakes checked, or if you have had your brakes checked and they say, it's getting close to being time to change them, I would consider getting that done before the winter. You're going to rely on your brakes more in ice and snowy conditions. It's going to take longer to make a full stop with worn out brakes. You don't want to waste or delay in investing in making sure your brakes are in full working order. If your car's a little bit older, have your brake lines inspected too. Here in New England, we drive through ice and snow and sand and salt and road salt. So we have to deal with corrosion with our vehicles that they don't have to worry about in, say, the Arizona desert all that much. And that can also be affecting your brake lines and your brake components. So have your mechanic or your trusted auto repair person give those a look. Now, stopping distance. We talk about tires a lot in the winter. This really kind of puts things in perspective a little bit when we look at stopping distances, and you can see the dramatic difference between dry pavement stopping and wet pavement stopping with all-season tires. So as you can see, a good set of all-season tires. Now, these tests were done with Consumer Reports with new tires. So if your tires are a few years old or your tread depth has been worn about halfway, you can tack on significant feet to these distances that we're showing here. So under ideal conditions with new tires, the stopping distance is only 134 feet. With wet pavement, that distance increases a bit. But when you look at snowy conditions, you can see even with great snow tires, that's significantly more stopping distance required than even on wet pavement with all-season tires. So winter tires and snow on the road doesn't mean that you can drive like it's dry out. You have to drive appropriately for the conditions. That means slowing down, increasing your following distance with the vehicles in front of you, because even with brand new winter tires and doing everything right, you need almost 3 times the stopping distance, a little bit less than 3 times the stopping distance than dry pavement. So then you can see, let's take a look at the all-season tires on snowy pavement. It's more than double with snow tires. So when you look at these numbers and imagine dry pavement with the tires and then snowy conditions, this is a 6-fold longer stopping distance required. So that means, if it takes you 10 feet to go from driving to a full stop, you're actually going to need 60 feet if there's snow on the road. So when you see snow on the road, just put a 6x in your mind, thinking I need 6 times the room in front of me to feel as safe as I do when I'm driving normally on dry pavement. That's kind of eye-opening to me, as someone before I worked for AAA and looked at traffic safety data. I often, kind of just, you don't really, you sort of abstract that kind of knowledge. Like, I know you need more stopping distance with worn out tires or in the snow, but I didn't know the numbers. And then seeing the numbers in front of me like that, it really kind of hits home, like, wow, that actually is significant distance when you put it like that. So other things to look at with your car, your heating and cooling systems, we rely on them a lot to keep cool in the summer, but in the winter, a good properly functioning heating and cooling system, super important. A lot of cars nowadays are it's not like, if I gave this presentation in the early 90s, I would be talking more about, antifreeze levels and radiators and that sort of thing. Cars nowadays, there's a lot of folks that do their own maintenance, but the vast majority of car owners, there's very little that you're going to be doing under the hood as far as topping off coolant and topping off brake fluid and that sort of thing. Not just because it's hard to access those things, or systems are pretty reliable now, or even advertised or sold as maintenance free or lifetime coolant. You may buy a car that says, that's it, it's lifetime. And in reality, it's in the lifetime of lifetime as defined by the owner or the manufacturer. Doesn't mean your lifetime. It means the lifetime of the vehicle, however many years they've determined that to be. So at some point, if people are going to keep the car for many, many years, those systems do need to be changed. The fluids need to be replaced, and you have to be using the correct fluid for the vehicle. You can't just with good, confidence, grab any container of coolant and dump it in any car and know how it's going to work. You got to make sure you're using the right stuff for the right vehicle. And a lot of folks just rely on their mechanics, myself included. I trust, my mechanic to replace that stuff if I need to, but it's always worth popping the hood and making sure that everything looks normal. So the antifreeze coolant is going to have its own reservoir. Just make sure that the levels between the high and the low line, your owner's manual, if it's still in your glove box with the shrink wrap on it, grab it, open it up, and just look for that image of the engine compartment where it'll tell you where the washer fluid reservoir is, the coolant reservoir, the brake fluid. and those sorts of things. You can check for leaks, or if you notice leaks on your driveway when your car has been parked, that's a signal. Okay, I got to start taking action on my heating and cooling system. If you can't get your windows to defrost, if when you have the frost on the inside of the window as well as the outside of the window, and you're cranking the heat and trying to control the moisture inside the car, that's problematic or difficult. That's a sign that maybe there's something up with your heating and cooling system you need to have checked out. Modern vehicles nowadays, a lot of it's automatic. You just kind of set the temperature you want, you hit auto, you'll be driving the dead of winter and your air conditioning will indicate that it's on. That's because it's using the dehumidifier part of the air conditioning system to dry the interior of the car and get that moisture off the inside of your windows to keep your windows clear. Air conditioning will often turn on automatically when you do the front window defrost, which if you use, you may notice that light comes on, you can't turn it off. A lot of folks like myself from older generations are used to driving cars. We had to manually move all that stuff around. So a lot of older folks in the newer vehicles, their instinct is, why is it, they feel like something might be wrong, but in fact, these cars are nowadays so automated that the best thing to do is often just to hit auto. It'll sense or detect the fact that, okay, the engine's cold, it's cold outside. It can read the moisture in the vehicle and may even automatically kind of know the best way to clear the car up as fast as possible without you intervening. So that's another thing to consider. And then manually, you want to clean your windshield on the inside as well. This is the time of year where people really notice glare, and they'll be driving, it's darker earlier, so folks commuting will be driving home at night, and then we get the sun in our eyes, and that's when you realize the inside of your window has like a film on it. And that's one thing that we neglect. If you talk in your car a lot, it's kind of gross, but we're really kind of building that layer of sort of stuff on the inside of the window. So you want to get in there with a good window cleaner, a microfiber cloth or two, and really go at it. They sell some things where you can use a stick to really clean the crevice that's really hard to get into. Depending on your vehicle, you might need to stretch out before you get in there and really clean that window, because you might have to contort your body into some tough spots to get the whole windshield. And you're going to want to go over it probably once or twice. I have this tendency where I think my car is perfectly clean when it's in the driveway, and I've done the windows and everything, and it looks great. And then I'm driving the following morning, and I realize it's still a little smudgy on the inside, and I didn't really get it fully, and I got to kind of polish it with another cloth to really get those streaks away. That'll make a big difference when we're dealing with ice and snow and inclement weather, when it's steamy in the car, and your visibility is limited. So clean windows really make a huge difference. And that leads me to winter blades or windshield wipers. Now's the best time to switch into a set of heavy duty wiper blades. The Michelin man there, he's giving the thumbs up. I recommend, doing this multiple times per year. A lot of folks, we just kind of drive with the same wiper blades until they start, leaving little spaghetti strands and they start just falling apart on us. You don't want that wiper arm scraping against the windshield without the rubber of the wiper blade there to protect your glass. But also they don't really work very good, and they really take a lot of abuse in the winter, especially when we're clearing ice and snow. If you you get that ice that's really welded onto the window and you're running the wiper blades, that's shredding your wipers. And sometimes we just don't have the time to fully melt everything and clean it perfectly before we have to get going in the morning. A lot of people who commute in the morning, whether it's snowing or not, they kind of rely on the wiper to kind of finish the job for them. That's going to really destroy your wiper blades in no time. So heavy duty wiper blades are worth the money. You could spend, a little bit more than you're comfortable with, maybe 30 to 50 bucks for a set, which may seem high, but when you're in bad weather and you flick that wand on next to your steering wheel and those blades just toss away the snow and give you good visibility, you'd be glad you invested in them. The difference between regular blades and heavy duty blades is often they have a little bit more shielding, so they'll prevent ice and other materials from building up on the blades. And also there are different forms of construction. Some of them have like multiple contact points, but then there are these sort of uniblade designs, which are pretty interesting because they apply uniform pressure across the entire length of the blade instead of these multiple points. So that way you get a much kind of cleaner, more uniform swipe. They don't fit all windshields, so you want to, maybe keep your receipt because you may replace them and find out you need to swap them out for something else. Don't be intimidated by wiper blades. They're a lot easier to put on. If you've never done it before, you'd be surprised how easy it is. The hardest part is really just kind of getting that little fiddly clip loose. Your owner's manual in your car should give you instructions on how to remove the factory ones of those if you're using just factory replacements. But it's not bad. And once you've done it one time, you'll feel pretty good about it. The other thing about winter driving, I have to say, is cleaning your car off. In Massachusetts, it's a law. You have to clear the roof of your car after snow. And oh man, I see people driving with, like in this picture all the time, on the highway, and those sheets fly off, and they can be deadly. Ice chunks smashing into a windshield on the highway. It can shatter windshields and cause crashes. And we all have driven behind a truck where the sheets start flying off the roof of the vehicle, and it's really scary. You don't want to be behind that person, but you also don't want to be that person. So take the time, clear it off with a brush. My trick is usually I try to get up as early as possible. Hopefully after the storm, it's a snowy day. You don't have to clear and scrape every single thing off. If you have to, if you have the luxury of not having to drive right away, I focus on getting the windows cleared and then the roof cleared, and I let the sun kind of get working on it, and then I shovel my driveway and other stuff. But getting some time in the sun is good. If your driveway is partially obscured by snow and sun, move it to the sunny part while you're working on it. That really, really helps and speeds up the melting process. And then you also have to prepare yourself when you're driving in ice and snow. I would say try to avoid wearing big, heavy, puffy clothes and coats and scarves while you're driving. I know it's uncomfortable getting in a freezing cold car, but what we know is that a lot of these puffy jackets and stuff, they actually really reduce the effectiveness of your seatbelt in a crash. So when we talk to new parents and we're installing car seats, I'm a certified car seat technician. One of the key pieces of advice we give parents of newborns and young children is take off the winter coat when you buckle them in. In crash tests, the child often just pops right out of the car seat in the event of a crash because the coat is so puffy that in the crash, it really compresses an amazing amount. And that means you have a big air gap between the child and the seatbelt. So that's enough for the baby to pop out, not to make light of a terrible situation, but that also applies to adults too. So if you're in a crash and you're wearing a big heavy jacket and say the vehicle, rolls over or something like that, you're not going to be as secured as if you were just buckled in with your regular clothing. So I would take your coat off, put it on the back seat. The car warms up, sure enough. A lot of cars nowadays have heated steering wheels, heated seats. So you'll be warm in no time, and it's worth the safety. Steering wheel covers, they're a bad idea. Floor mats, if you're buying winter durable floor mats for the mud and the sand, which is a great idea, buy one that is specifically designed for your car. You don't want to lay anything on top of a floor mat. You don't want multiple floor mats. These things slide around. They'll get stuck under your gas pedal or under your brake pedal. Nothing worse than the feeling of not being able to actually hit the brakes because something is blocking it physically, and you don't want to be reaching under there trying to free up a stuck pedal while you're on the road. Many crashes are caused by ill-fitting accessories and things on the floor. So definitely stick with things that are made to give you a factory fit. That if your floor has little clips that kind of lock the floor mat in place, get something compatible with those. You type your car in on a search on a store that sells those things, and they'll give you, there's plenty of options for your exact car model. So always make sure that you have properly secured floor mats. I would not recommend driving with mittens on. You want your fingers. Driving gloves made for the winter are a good idea. You can wear regular gloves, but a lot of gloves like you'd wear for shoveling snow, they're cumbersome. And also nowadays, a lot of cars have touch screens for interacting with, heating and cooling systems now. I like buttons and knobs, but some vehicles you actually have to use your finger and your glove won't register. So that's another thing to consider. And then you're on the road. What do you got with you? A winter road kit. So, it's always a good idea to just have a little bit of an emergency kit in the back of your car. I recommend jumper cables. It's always handy to be the person with jumper cables and not going around hoping to find someone with them if you ever need them. Keep your phone charged, of course. If you're just going to the grocery store, obviously this is a little overkill. But if you are going on a road trip, you never know when you could end up stuck in the snow. It happens. My family was once on a trip to Wildcat Mountain in New Hampshire. I was a little kid, I was a little boy, and we were driving my parents' Buick. I was a station wagon, and all was going great, but we needed gas, and we're on the highway, and we weren't really sure where we were. My father and mother were like, all right, we'll just take the next exit. And it turned out to be a pretty remote area. There was nothing around the exit. So my father said, all right, well, I'll just pull on the side road and turn around and we'll get back on the highway. And we pull on this little side road and we're going down. He's looking for a driveway to turn around in. And little did we realize the road was covered in a sheet of ice. So he's meant to slow down to pull into a driveway. And we just kept sliding and sliding and sliding about 100 feet into a snowbank. And there was like nobody around. So we were stuck, and my father and I had to walk like a quarter mile, blistering cold, knock on this person's door. They, it was a sight to behold. They were probably unnerved because it was a pretty remote area, and they probably didn't get visitors at that time of night knocking on their door. They were nice enough to lend us some logs, and I remember my father and I laying logs behind the wheels, and it was awful, but we managed to get out of there somehow. So needless to say, if we had a winter kit, maybe we wouldn't have to bug those poor folks. And kitty litter, some folks have a bag of sand, a little hand shovel is a good thing just to give yourself some traction if need be. First aid kit, backup washer solution maybe. I've got a few things listed there. AAA, we sell like a little emergency kit. The flares are useful. The triangle can be useful. It's a good idea to have something reflective if you do break down on the side of the road and you need to get outside the vehicle for some way. Just having a reflective sticker on your arm or something like that at night, it's pretty dangerous on the roadside. So we just want you to stay safe. Traction mats can work as well as sand. A flashlight and batteries is a good investment. Batteries, though, if you leave it in the car, you're going to want to annually go through your kit, maybe pull the batteries out and use them in your house and replace them with a fresh set, because these things, they age over time. And then when we're on the road, I kind of alluded to how we have to change our driving behavior when it's cold and when there's snow on the ground. And the fact is, even in the cold, we have to drive a little bit differently than we would in the summer, even if the roads are dry. And that relates a lot to our hardness of our tires. When it's really cold, our tires are much harder, so we need more distance to stop. That means just having a good, safe following distance. In general, a good rule of thumb, when it is snowing, you want to reduce your speed by about 30% on average. A lot of times that means going below the speed limit to be safe. Now, I've noticed in New England, when it's actively snowing and there's snow on the road, a lot of people do heed caution to the conditions. So you can just stick with those folks, stay to the right, and go safely. Oftentimes you can stay in someone else's tire treads. They've already sort of carved a path through the snow, and you can kind of ride behind them at a safe distance. But there's always going to be those people who are driving as if there's no snow on the road, think that's totally fine, and they're flying by. So steer clear of those folks. And then momentum on slippery surfaces, your vehicle's going to want to keep going in a straight line. So it takes a lot of energy and traction to change direction. So as we're approaching a curve, you want to lift your foot off the gas a little bit. I'm thinking of, bends on the highway. You can see the highway bending in a direction. So as we approach that curve, we lift our foot off the gas and kind of slow down a little bit, so we can just kind of naturally enter the curve, and you get a feel for whether your car is still going to stay planted or if you might give. The more you drive in the snow, the more familiar you are with your car, so you kind of know the limits, and you get a sense, you get a hunch. Am I going too fast? If you start asking yourself, maybe I'm going a little too fast, you probably are going a little too fast. So trust that gut instinct. Stay in the lane that's clear, of course. Many times, the plows, they get to one lane on a highway and the other lanes have a little bit more snow in them. So stay on the lane that's more plowed. General rule of thumb on following distance, older folks and myself included, I was taught, use car lengths, 1 car length for every 10 miles an hour. As it turns out, that's not the best advice because it's kind of hard to calculate in real time. And, people don't like doing math when they're driving. So we say seconds, so look at the vehicle in front of you, see it pass something, and then start counting 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. General rule of thumb is 3 or 4 second following distance from the vehicle in front of you. And in the winter, let's add a few seconds to that. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-second following distance. That's fine. You leave a nice solid gap between yourself and the car in front of you. Yeah, people are going to get in front of you. That's fine. Just keep a distance. You'll be thankful if suddenly people are hitting their brakes. You can slow down nice and easy. You don't have to worry about hitting the brakes and then losing control or sliding and hitting the person in front of you. And that person who's behind you, who's maybe driving a little too fast or following too close, they're not going to hit into you because you are able to slow down more gradually. So that's the thing about following distance that I think sometimes people don't really think through. It's not just about hitting the person in front of you. It's about kind of giving the person behind you more time to react. They may not be fully paying attention. So you're starting to slow down. They're distracted by their phone or something. They look up, you're slowing down. They hit their brakes. Well, you have all that more time because of that following distance. They're going to slow down. They're not going to hit you. So in a way, you're protecting your rear as well as your front by keeping that safe following distance. And in the cold and in the snow, it's just all that more important to expand that following distance. It might even feel unnatural, like, your normal habit, the way you normally line yourself up with other cars. You might have to kind of force yourself to ease up a little bit. No, I got to increase the following distance a little more. You'll get used to it though, and then you'll feel comfortable. And then, on bridges, highway overpasses and underpasses, you've seen those signs. Bridges freeze before a road. That's true. It's just something to keep in mind. Don't use your cruise control on the ice and snow. If your wheel slips a little bit, it'll mess the cruise control system up. It doesn't function well. So we want to avoid using that. And black ice is important. Brake progressively is on this slide. That's really important. Kind of anticipate the fact, I'm thinking of those sort of stretches of road along a busy shopping area where you've got sets of lights. You're going to hit a light, so trying to go really fast to beat the light and then it turns yellow and then you got to hit your brakes, and you want to avoid those types of scenarios. Just anticipate having to stop ahead of time, so that way you can just sort of begin to slow down, start eating up some of those miles per hour and reduce it. And so as you do finally make that final approach to before you stop at that light or that intersection, you're really stopping from a relatively slow speed. So a nice gradual slowdown heading toward the light significantly sooner than you would slow down on a dry road. There's some repeated bullet points there. Okay, you do slide off the road. Oh boy, it happens. No judgment, it happens to everybody at some point. To avoid it, one thing to remember is that with ABS, modern ABS systems, and there's advice here for people with a non-ABS system, but nowadays you can't buy a car without ABS, which is an automatic braking system. So don't worry about pumping your brakes or easing into the brakes. You can start depressing the brake and press the more firmly if you need to slow down sooner. Your ABS system will prevent the wheels from slipping as much as it can. There is going to be conditions where it doesn't matter. ABS isn't going to stop you from losing traction just because the roads are too slippery or tires don't have enough grip. But apply constant pressure, and that's the best thing to do to slow down and stop if you are at risk of crashing or you need to immediately stop. Also, when we're holding down the brake pedal, a lot of times our tendency, our human instinct really, is to just freeze in place. Now, in the ice and snow, it can be tricky because it's slippery, but people don't often remember the fact that even when you're holding down the brake pedal, you can still steer the vehicle because, the wheels aren't locking, the wheels are turning, you're slowing down, you still are able to steer. So we encourage people to try to steer out of a collision or try to steer away from an obstacle. If you're slowing down and you're losing traction, you still want to try to steer. People sometimes say, oh, you want to steer opposite the direction you're going, and that's sometimes confusing for people. The best advice really is just look at where you want to go, and your body will naturally steer in the direction that you're looking. And that's really the best advice for the vast majority of drivers out there. In an emergency situation, hold down the brake, look where you want to go, and steer toward it. And that's the best thing to do to avoid a collision. Okay, so if you are stuck, you can often rock yourself out if you don't have traction mats or sand. Many cars with automatic transmissions, there's a low gear. You want to get into that and with your wheels straight, so you can go forward a little bit, and then you hit the brake, and then you shift into reverse, and then you go backwards a little bit, and you can kind of, depending on the vehicle, you can slowly sort of rock yourself out of the situation, or at least get enough momentum in one direction to overcome that spot you're stuck in, and then kind of move out of it. The issue to keep in mind with that is you don't want to try it for too long. If it's kind of a hopeless cause and you're not making any progress, I'd give up. You could damage your transmission. You could burn out things. It's not really good for the car to constantly be going forward and backward. But in a pinch, you can wiggle yourself out of a situation. You want to be very easy with the gas pedal. You kind of need to get a feel for it. If you just slam on the gas, slam on the brake, the wheels are just going to spin in place, and you're going to dig deeper and deeper into the snow. So you want to try to be really ginger with it. If you have a manual transmission car, which fewer and fewer people do, that's ideal because you can really manipulate the forward and backward and the gears in such a way that's a little bit harder in an automatic vehicle. If all else fails, call AAA, right? That's why you have AAA, and we will help you get out of that situation safely. Don't tie things to your bumper and have people pull you out if you don't really know what you're doing. You can cause damage that way. And this is why it's good to have an emergency kit with some bottles of water, a snack or two, a warm blanket. It's always handy to have a nice heavy duty wool or down blanket in the back of your car. If you have to kill some time in a vehicle for an extended period of time waiting for help, it's nice to have that to keep warm. You can run the engine to keep the heater going. However, if you get stuck in the snow and you have the engine running, you absolutely have to make sure that your exhaust pipe is clear and not covered at all. And that's to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. It's very, very important. Please just make sure to always check that tailpipe. When you're shoveling snow outside and your car's buried in snow, clear that tailpipe first. Make sure that tailpipe's clear as you're clearing your car as well. That's important to note as well. People have died in their cars, in their own driveways, waiting for them to warm up after clearing out their cars, not realizing that their car was backed against a snowbank, the tailpipe was clogged, and they're just sitting there listening to the radio, and then they fall asleep. So please clear that tailpipe. And when we're going up hills, momentum's the name of the game. You don't want to try to race up the hill too fast. Depending on the slope of the hill in the snow, you could have the wheel spin, you lose traction easily. There's a fine line between having the maximum amount of acceleration and spinning out, and every car is different. But the main rule of thumb is slow and steady wins the race. Try to avoid stopping. You got to keep going, because when you stop, that's it. You're starting from zero. It's much harder to get traction from an initial stop than it is to just maintain a slow speed and slowly build it up. The other thing is if you have a all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, they're different. They're quite different, actually. All-wheel drive is helpful in these situations. It helps you get going from a stop. If you're stopped and you have all-wheel drive and you're in the snow, you're going to have an easier time getting going than somebody who doesn't have all-wheel drive. However, once you're actually driving, all-wheel drive really doesn't provide much benefit at all. That's one of those big misconceptions that people have about all-wheel drive. And I blame some of the car companies for that, because they show these pictures of, cars blazing through snowy roads in their car commercials, and they say all-wheel drive, all our cars have all-wheel drive. Yeah, that's helpful to get started from a stop. Once you're driving, all-wheel drive really does not give you any additional traction or any additional maneuverability on the roadway while moving than a front-wheel drive car. It really doesn't. And when you're braking, all cars have four-wheel braking, right? So all-wheel drive is one of those things where it's very useful in the snow. It's very useful for people who drive in the snow, but it's not safer on the highway, and it doesn't let you drive any faster in the snow. So if you have all-wheel drive, you have to drive just like everybody else with front-wheel drive once you're driving. And all the same advice I've been giving all along applies to you as well. Four-wheel drive is a little bit different. And if you drive a Jeep, you'll know. But most people, they have all-wheel drive. Okay. And then once you get over the crest of the hill, you want to moderate your speed. You want to rely on coasting and be ready that if you do need to stop, it's going to take that much longer to stop. Not only is the road slipperier, and we saw those long stopping distance graphs earlier in this presentation, plus you're going downhill. So now you've got gravity working behind you as well. So be mindful of that. It's going to take that much longer. I see people kind of do this when I'm driving in the snow, or where you're starting to go uphill and then their speed's declining, and then once they start going downhill, it's like they just keep their foot on the same position on the gas pedal, and they just start going faster and faster and faster and faster. And then you approach the hill again on the highway, and then you notice like you catch back up to them, and then you get to so they're not adjusting their speed or their acceleration or their gas pedal. They're just kind of just driving, and the landscape kind of changes how they're driving. Well, you want to be a little bit more actively engaged with your driving, especially in the winter, where you're going to have to, maybe give it less gas than you're used to, and rely more on momentum and gravity than just giving it gas and giving it a brake to speed up or slow down. Always wear your seatbelt. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but in Massachusetts, the seatbelt usage rate is shockingly low. It's only about 75%. And that's the lowest in New England. And we're basically like trading, places with the bottom of the country. We're almost last in seatbelt usage rates in Massachusetts. Like in Connecticut, it's like 98%. Here, it's like 75%. So it's a big problem in the state. We've got a lot of, independent, libertarian-minded folks here, kind of like New Hampshire, live free or die, right? But New Hampshire has a much higher seatbelt usage rate, so go figure. It's a lot of like men, sadly, working class guys. Picture, someone driving a work van or a contractor's truck or a pickup truck. Those guys are not wearing seatbelts, and it's a big problem. So please buckle up. Make sure all your passengers are always buckled up. Your head restraint, it's not a headrest, it's a head restraint. When you're sitting in your driver's seat, your ears should kind of basically end up in the middle of the head restraint. So when you look at your head restraint, are your ears right at kind of the middle part? If not, adjust your head restraint, maybe raise it or lower it to make sure it does. That's just to prevent whiplash if you get rear-ended in a crash. It's a safety device. Hands-on wheel, I don't know why that's there. It's kind of obvious, right? You don't have a self-driving car. Adjust your seat. Yeah, a lot of folks, they don't adjust their driving position or their steering wheel or their seat enough, maybe, or they don't realize how adjustable their whole car is. Especially as we get older, we tend to shrink a little bit. So we may want to raise our seat or lower our steering wheel. Your steering wheel you should have about because you should be able to take a school ruler, 12 inches or so, and between your chest and the front of the steering wheel. So if your steering wheel is closer than that, you want to adjust that, mainly because there's an airbag there. We want it to work properly and protect you if there's a crash. And then, yeah, my last suggestion is basically my first suggestion is don't bother driving in the winter if you don't have to. It's definitely not the best situation to be in driving in the snow, but it can be enjoyable if the roads are quiet. And I have some very vivid, fond memories of driving in New England after a snowstorm, especially those mornings where the snow is still on the trees and some of our beautiful country roads. I mean, it's wonderful. New England winters are wonderful, and snow is something we got to deal with. But it can be a menace on the road, but with some planning ahead of time and some confidence and just knowing safe approaches, it's no big deal to us New Englanders, right? So does anyone have any comments or questions? I'm happy to address them. I feel like I just kind of, barked out a ton of information in a short period of time, but it has been almost an hour. So I don't want to keep everyone all night.
Mark, I have a quick question.
Yes.
It's about driving on a hill, which I think I do pretty well at because I live on a very steep hill and I learned to drive on that hill. But I remember when I was young, my dad would always say at the top of the hill, put your car into low gear before you go down. And I have to pull into a shared driveway, like halfway down. So like, what's the best way to approach that? Anything beyond what you already told us?
No, not really. And your father's advice was spot on. On a very steep hill, relying on the engine resistance in a low gear, like the resistance of the gear and the engine itself is really an effective way of controlling your speed and not having your speed get out of control. Similar to trucks, large tractor trailers, they use engine braking to slow down. And part of it is that it slows you down faster, but it also spares the brakes, especially with all that weight behind it. The brakes can give out. So in the winter, same thing. If you're riding those brakes on a long steep hill, your brakes can overheat and reduce their effectiveness. But also the lower gear just kind of keeps you at a more consistent, slower speed, and you have better tractions, especially if you are going downhill and you're fighting gravity and the natural inclination is for the car to keep speeding up. So you're riding the brakes. Yeah, that's great advice. So
Right.
I would recommend that in those situations. On the highway, you don't want to switch in a low gear, but in your situation that you're describing where there's this one steep hill and you come down it, I would definitely keep doing what works. And it's good to use the low gear and experiment with it sometimes, on a snowy day, if you've never done it before and you're have to drive down this hill, no harm in doing that. Certainly. I drove cross country a couple times, and in Colorado, coming out of the Rockies, it's downhill for a really long stretch. And there are signs that say use engine braking or shift to lower gear, because if you don't, next thing you know, you're going like 100 miles an hour, 110 miles an hour, and you keep braking all the way down to 70, you let go and you just keep speeding up and you brake and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't slow this car down. So you downshift one gear, and the engine can sound like it's straining, but that's okay. If it's not redlining and it's within that safe range, it's okay to stay in that lower gear. The modern vehicles won't let you blow the engine or transmission by redlining it for too long. I mean, you don't want to do it, you don't want to push it, but yeah, if the engine's straining and you're in a lower gear and you're going downhill, you definitely want to use the brakes. You can't rely on it alone, but yeah, certainly using a lower gear is not a bad idea at all to keep moderate speed downhill.
Thank you. He's going to be glad to hear that his advice was confirmed.
Yeah. Any other comments? Did anyone put anything in the chat?
Yeah, there is one thing in the chat.
Rear wheel drive cars. Yes. Yeah. Whoo. Winter tires. I would say if you're driving a rear wheel drive vehicle in the winter and you do expect to drive in any snow or in icy conditions, I would strongly recommend a decent set of winter tires. In fact, I would probably rather drive a rear wheel vehicle drive with winter tires than a front wheel vehicle with just regular all seasons. Just because of the way I drive, I'm a pretty moderate conservative driver. I don't drive aggressively or fast by any means. And I drove a rear wheel drive vehicle for a long time. So I'm comfortable with it. If you actually know that you're driving a rear wheel, I have struggled with that one for some reason, rear wheel drive vehicle. Some people seek them out. They like the way it feels. I enjoy it myself. I drive a front wheel drive vehicle now. There's not a lot of rear wheel drive vehicles on the market these days, especially as we head toward electric vehicles, which are going to be mostly all wheel drive. There will be some rear wheel drive vehicles, but definitely you have to approach things differently. You have to remember that the rear end can slide out from behind pretty easily. I would, it's kind of fun in the snow rear wheel drive because you can do the donut so easily. I mean, I think about, Starsky and Hutch and the movies from the 70s where we've got these great car chases. Those were all big American V8 powered rear wheel drive vehicles that, do the slides and, but they're a little trickier in the snow. So definitely moderating speed is extra important, and being a little extra cautious on bends and turns, and be mindful of the fact that if you give it too much acceleration going around a corner, it's much easier for the back end to slide out from you than a front wheel drive vehicle, where you can kind of like tractor your way through things by giving it gas. You can kind of accelerate your way almost out of a problem sometimes. Rear wheel drive vehicle it's a lot different. You have to kind of, but
Thank you. It's a 1990 Volvo.
oh, nice.
Volvo 240DL.
Okay. So yeah, you're probably not, okay. I was visualizing like a Dodge Charger or a Challenger.
No.
But maybe doing burnouts isn't in your picture, but definitely be a little more careful in there. But snow tires would be worth the investment, I think.
I
if you plan on
have them,
keeping-
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, snow tires, one thing I'll mention is it's absolutely important to get those tires off come spring. You're going to wear those suckers down if you drive in the warm weather with them too long. I've seen folks driving in like July in the heat and they've got a set of Blizzak winter tires on. I'm like, oh no, those tires are going to be useless because the soft compound is great in the winter, but in the summer, the tires just like dissolve on the hot pavement when you're driving. So but most people who have winter tires, they're in a routine. They know it's time of year to switch them on, it's time of year to switch them off. The great thing about having winter tires as well is your all seasons are going to last that much longer because they're not being driven on for almost half the year. So it is an upfront cost. However, you've got two sets of tires that are going to wear out half as quickly if you look at it that way. So you got to buy another set of tires, but you're going to be replacing each set less frequently. So if you're keeping in a car for a number of years, in the end, it may be a wash. I don't know, but it's worth it for a lot for myself.
Mark, I have a little question for you. I know you covered a little bit about black ice. Can you just review again the best thing to do? And pump brakes is a thing of the past. We don't do that.
Yes.
Brakes, right?
So black ice is one of those things that is really tricky because you can't really spot it very easily. It's basically just ice that's formed on the surface of the road, and it's like highly compact, and it just basically looks like pavement. You can't even see it because it's, you can see the road either through it, or it's a patch of ice that it's not like a big chunk of obvious ice you're sitting there, and you're driving on a sheet of ice. So the best advice is, using all the overall techniques we talked about, reducing your speed in general, keeping that safe following distance in general, all the tips on slowing down your movements, slowing down more gradually. All those tips are really designed around the fact that you are going to encounter black ice. So in those moments where you happen to be driving on them, you're going to say, well, it's a good thing I'm keeping my following distance. It's a good thing I'm slowing down gradually and anticipating stops and taking my foot off the gas as I approach curves and that sort of thing. Because when you do hit that patch of black ice, you're in control and you're not going too fast for the conditions. That said, if you find yourself on a patch of black ice, if you're able to just keep going straight, stay calm and try to slow down by just depressing the brake pedal. Try to be as smooth as possible with your movements, no sudden abrupt maneuvers if possible. And as you said, you don't need to pump the brakes like the old days to avoid the wheels from locking up. You want to just begin to press the brake pedal. And if you need to brake harder, to press it more firmly. If the ABS kicks in to prevent the wheels from slipping, it may feel a little awkward. I don't know if anyone here has experienced the ABS system working, but it can feel like the brake pedals like pumping or pulsing or popping feeling. One of my cars I had, it was really kind of violent feeling, almost like something was breaking underneath my foot. But in fact, that's the ABS working as it's designed. So don't panic if the ABS kicks on. It's protecting you from sliding out of control. It's keeping those wheels turning and slowing down the vehicle as much as possible. And that's really the best advice. And just be aware that it's going to be out there, especially those times where it warms up enough during the day, there's sun, we get the puddles and like melting, the snow banks kind of, melt a little bit on the roadway. Sun goes down, temperature drops, things harden and freeze up. So you kind of will sense, as you head out in the morning, it's like, this is the kind of day, the conditions are ripe for black ice. Just putting in your mind that you may encounter it is going to make you more prepared and more calm when you do encounter it. And yeah, it's one of those things. And then you'll see it more likely on bridges, on highway overpasses, and on ramps and off ramps. So when you're getting on a highway, just be a little heightened alert. When you're getting off the highway and slowing down, be a little heightened alert, and just anticipate those. And also areas, where if you're familiar with an area, you're familiar with certain roadways, you kind of know the spots where those big puddles show up after rain, areas where maybe the drainage system isn't the best, and they tend to be a little more puddly or flood more often in heavy rains. Well, those are the areas where you're going to see the black ice, because that's where the water collects. So use your spidey sense and your sixth sense as you're driving and be like, this seems like the kind of road where, I might get those little, some of the older country roads, they kind of like get a little, you can see the undulations as you're driving. Well, if it's after a snow event, I have a hunch you'd see little pockets of black ice in those little depressions in the roadway.
Right.
It's kind of just putting your head in that space, and you'll be amazed by the observations you can make when you start paying attention to it, and just putting the thought in your head will protect you because you're just ready for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, because I gave this talk, we're gonna get no snow this year, right? Yeah, and if there's no other questions, that's it. Oh, I'll put my email address up. So if anybody is catching this on YouTube, it's late at night and you can't sleep and stumble on this YouTube video and you watch the whole thing and you're at the end and you want to comment, my email address is right there. You can reach out to me. If anybody here in the audience wants to send me a question afterwards, more than happy to oblige. I can help you with any AAA related questions, AAA public affairs. So, I'm out there talking about all kinds of stuff, gas prices, but, any questions about the club or membership or people, have interesting questions. We still do triptychs. People ask me that all the time. You guys still do triptychs? We do triptychs. Yeah. People ask me a lot lately. So I don't know. I think there was some internet post or something floating around where we're like, oh, remember triptychs, and kind of like old timey things that people used to do. There's a nostalgia thing. Like, remember when the tape would come out of the tape cassette and you had to use the pen to wind it back up? Remember? And then someone's like, remember going on trips with triptychs? And I'm like, wait, we still do those. Like, those aren't obsolete yet. Come on.
Yeah, I thought that they stopped doing them. I thought I even read someplace that they did.
Now, see, we offer digital ones, so you can do it digitally, which is better for the environment. We're not doing paper, but if you reach out and want to do triptychs, we still do them. We print them out, and yeah, we do them. In fact, we've had people ask for triptychs for road trips with EV charging stations because they drive an electric vehicle. So it's an interesting old-fashioned way to do a road trip in a super modern vehicle that you got to find charging stations to keep charge along the trip. So hey man, AAA members are great. We have everybody has AAA. So a lots of people out there doing all sorts of interesting things, but people like triptychs. And I think what's happening now is people are tired of just being controlled by their GPS. You know, you put it in, it tells you what to do, and you're just kind of driving like a robot, and you're taking the route whatever the computer tells you. And there's something adventurous about kind of taking out a map, planning it out, and just sort of going off the beaten path. Or you know, people want to look what's along the roadside. You know, there's interesting farm stands, there's interesting sites along the way. If you just program the most efficient route that Google wants to take you on, you know, it's just one more thing to kind of disengage you from life and being out there. So I think there's been a little bit of a revival in things like triptychs and maps and kind of doing things pre smartphone and high tech. And I'm all for that. I'm going through a little bit of that myself these days. So I totally relate to that. But maybe someday we won't do the paper triptychs anymore and be only digital. But it's definitely something that we still do.
Good.
And the battery service, I did mention it. It's a good thing to do to be proactive, to get your battery replaced before it dies and leaves you stranded. I will say though, however, this time of year, we have a lot of battery calls. So I would, now's a good time to do it actually, to schedule it and have them come when it's convenient for you. It's just that we get a lot of the battery calls for people in emergencies. So this time of year, those calls really tick up. So our roadside folks kind of say like, hey, can you guys not like totally promote the heck out of the battery service right now? Just because our guys are so busy right now. We don't want to overburden them with a bunch of people being like, oh, I heard about the battery service, you know, like, can we just save some of their bandwidth for people in emergencies? Because we don't want our wait times to be extended. We don't want somebody to call with an emergency and then, you know, have to wait a long time. But really after the Thanksgiving holiday, like last week was, you know, major busy travel times because, you know, a lot of our members are traveling for the holidays. So we get a lot of calls now that week's over. So now's a good window of time to do that, to be proactive. Even if you don't need a battery, it's good to get the terminals cleared.
I can speak to that battery service. It was an emergency, but the service is so different than back when it was a jump or a tow.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It is. It's great. They come, they hook it up, they show you like, all right, this shows me, you know, you get a whole readout, you know, and it tells you what the percentage lifespan is and everything. I had to use it this summer. Our battery in our family vehicle died and we were in upstate New York on a family trip in the car. We drove there, no problem. We parked at the hotel. It was parked for 3 or 4 days without us driving because we didn't need it. We load the car to go home, try to start the button. Bleh. And then the battery is about 5 years old. So I was like, I guess the battery, that road trip in the hot August weather, it finally killed it. We did get a jump in the parking lot. I had my cables and I ran up to another family to get a jump because I didn't want to use my service call in upstate New York. I'm Massachusetts, like I didn't want to do it there. We wanted to get on the road. So we got on the road, we drove all the way home. And then we scheduled it with the app. And I was just like, I used the chat bot feature, which is actually pretty cool. You know, most people now, they just call it AAA, but the app, we've made a lot of progress with it in the last few years. And it was just like, oh, what do you need? And I said, batteries. Like, oh, you need a battery service? So I was like, yes. And I said, okay, all right, do you want someone to come now or do you want to schedule? I said, now or at earliest convenience. Like, okay, all right, we dispatched a truck. Here's a map and I could see the battery truck on the map drive. And it was like accurate estimation. It was like so hands off and easy. I was really impressed. I actually had reached out to our app people and was like, it's been a while since I've used the app for a service call. And I got to say, you guys are really doing a good job with it these days. So that was cool. And yeah, like you said, it was super easy and they came, replaced the battery. And I, you know, I paid a decent amount for the battery. Batteries aren't 40, 50 bucks anymore. I hate to say it, folks. A modern car battery is going to be a little bit more expensive than it was 20 years ago, which is about the last time I had to buy a car battery. So, but I got the battery and I went online and looked and, you know, it wasn't any cheaper to do it, you know, through traditional means. Plus they did it for me. It was all set, you know, it saves the trouble of getting the battery out of the car
Right.
yourself. And then we recycle it for you. So that's the other thing. If you do it yourself, that's great. But now you got this dead battery you got to recycle.
Mhm.
And that can be an additional cost. So
I
and
had
they
a
are
quick,
yes.
Mark, I had a quick question about, that's kind of related to a battery story. I actually drove up to the next town, although it's some distance, and I went up a highway where there were a lot of hills, and the car was fine. It got me there just fine. And I dropped off my dry cleaning, and all of a sudden I got back in the car and it was completely dead. And I realized it was probably the battery. But one problem I had was this particular dry cleaners is at an address where there's a number for the main street that's actually in front of the building that's behind where the dry cleaner is. And the dry cleaner has a rear address. So it's like 117 rear Main Street or something like that. Anyway, the biggest problem I had was getting the tow truck to find me, because for various reasons I ended up needing a tow. But getting the tow truck to find me, because when I talked to AAA, they said there was no way to put the rear into the address. And so the poor tow truck driver, I was thinking he was going to say I was a crank call or I didn't exist, because he was going up and down on Main Street where I was completely, it was two buildings basically behind where he was. And that he finally did find me, but I was just wondering, maybe you could pass on that comment to someone who might be able to change the system.
Yeah,
because it was a great system. He did find me, he didn't give up. And
good.
the biggest problem I had was they wouldn't let me ride in the cab. And I had to call a friend in another town to come and get me, because there aren't that many cabs in the area or Ubers or anything like that. So
Yeah. No, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, the riding in the cab situation is it's a little tricky. You know, with COVID kind of changed that a little bit. And I don't know what the real story is on that, but there have been some concerns about maybe liability and that sort of thing. But yeah, you should be able to get a ride in the cab. So, but to your point about the address, I totally get the frustration there. I'm glad the driver didn't give up. One thing that's kind of worth noting is that we do have our own fleet of our own drivers, and we have a pretty big fleet, but we do have some outside contractors that, you know, separate tow companies that we do work with. And sometimes, you know, they might have some issues there. So I don't know if that was a contractor or it was one of our guys. The issue with addresses is, right, so if you called, they would have to type the address in, and I could see where, you know, I've lived in an apartment where I had a similar address type problem where I like constantly just getting things to my actual address was a total nightmare because of the way the address was. And when you type it in, it's like everything always defaulted to the wrong thing, and that's just what the post office had. But I had to like literally have a phone conversation with people to say, no, you have to like get out, you got to go around them. So I get that. I think one thing about the app, which may be really useful, is that, and I got to double check the capability, but there should be a way to just literally like send your GPS coordinates, like your location, like a dot on a map. So that way the driver on their panel in the cab of their truck can literally see a dot. So they'll be able to look on the map and say, okay, well, I'm driving on this main road, but I can see they're on the other side of the building. So they would be able to kind of follow that signal and then find the member at that location, regardless of whatever address has to be typed in. You know what I mean? So that's something to consider, but I'll bring that up, the fact that, you know, your story, and I appreciate the feedback, because we're always trying to improve. And you know, the drivers should be able to get in touch with a member directly to sort out like, okay, where exactly are you? Or, you know, can you, you know, help if they're having a hard time finding you, that we should be able to coordinate them and the member without too much headache. So I'm glad it worked out for you in the end.
Thank you. Yeah, it worked out fine, but it just, there was that little bit of a sort of kerfluffle with the rear
Yeah.
address.
Yeah.
And it just, I thought I'd mention it so that it, maybe you could pass it on as a comment.
Yeah, I will.
Thank
And
you.
I absolutely will. And the feedback's important and I appreciate it. And we take it seriously. It's one of those, you hear it all the time, but my 5 years at AAA or 4 years, I've brought up things before that people have told me, and it's people snap to attention, or it's taken seriously and incorporated to improve our service. So thank you. And thank you for being a member. Any other thoughts? I feel like I've kind of covered it.
It's been good.
It's that way. Thank you, Mark. This has really been helpful.
Good. Thank you.
Definitely
these-
good to have. I feel better having listened to this before the snow arrives. Hopefully
Yeah.
I'll remember it when the snow does arrive.
You will. It's part of your instinct now. The following distance. Yeah, it's your hunch. Every time I've had a close call or anytime I've been driving and something's gone wrong, before it happened, there was a voice in my head going, that guy over there, I feel like he's not paying attention. He might bang into me, and then all of a sudden he bangs into you, or that car, I don't know if they see me, I'm approaching and they're trying to cut across 2 lanes and they're looking the other way, and I don't know if they're going to see me. And then they don't see you and they pop out. So I think a lot of times it's heeding those instincts. It's when we just I have right of way. Like, I don't care. I'm driving, and if you hit me, it's your problem. Like, that's how you get into the crash. So I think, you don't want to be overly scared and, hit the brakes every time anything happens. You want to be confident, but it always, a lot of folks, before they get into a collision or something, there's that sort of feeling like, maybe I should slow down a little, or,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. Thank you, Marcia and the friends,
Yeah,
for
thank
bringing
you.
Mark to us tonight. And thank you,
Yeah.
Mark. And thank you
Yes.
for everybody who joined us
Thank you.
tonight.
Yeah,
And I hope to be with you again sometime soon.
I'm sure you
Absolutely.
will. Thanks
All
again,
right.
Mark. And
You bet.
good night, everybody. And I hope you all have a nice evening, and let's all stay safe.
Yep. We'll
Sounds
see
good.
everybody at the open house on Sunday.
Yeah, we hope so. Yes. Yeah. 2 to 4.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Mark.